Hello and welcome to Wonderful Tonight. I am tonight's host, Hannah. So I'd like to welcome you all back to tonight's show. Thank you for coming back. A topic requested by a friend out there in the Lone Star State, Texas, asked me if I would be interested in covering current events. So, unless you've been hiding out under a rock since 2019, I'm sure we're all sick and tired of hearing of COVID-19. But, amid this pandemic, we've seen an explosion of cases of rampant racism. And yes, I'm talking about both the sharp increase of hate crimes towards Asians and also the Black Lives Matter movement. Both extremely important. This week's Astrology Corner will also circle around this theme because it interestingly coincides enough, so look forward to that later in this program, even if you don't like all that woo-woo stuff. Now, one note before I put on some music. The K-pop industry owes a lot of its success and the very essence of its genre to black music. Whether they drew their inspiration from R&B or hip-hop or jazz, we can't ignore the fact that without black music from America, K-pop as it stands today would not exist. 'Cause let's be real, K-pop, short for Korean pop, sounds absolutely nothing like actual traditional Korean music. We stopped doing that after, what was it? There was Chang for a while, Trot, for any of you that may or may not have heard your moms and dads or grandparents singing those songs. However, there is a young Korean band trying to bring that back. They're called Sodo Band, and they've invented a new genre that they dub Joseon Pop. For those of you who don't know, Joseon was the last dynasty of Korea before, well, World War II, the Cold War, all of those wars. Yeah, so they're taking a lot of traditional Korean songs and making it pop music. So for tonight's first song, I would like to introduce this very interesting fusion band to you all that I've fallen in love with. This is 서도's 사랑가. And for those of you wondering, yes, there is an original version if you want to go check that out. But enjoy this Chosun pop. That was 서도's 예상곡. I understand it might feel like something new or actually something a bit too old to be listening to, but I really enjoy the genre. It's like my roots are calling out to me and reminding me of all the Han Korean people inherently are born with. Now, in my, little over 2 decades of living, I've had several discussions with people, and there have been many differing views across the spectrum. I've seen a lot of people saying that it's time for Asian Americans to stand up and fight back against the injustices that we have been facing the entire time we've been here. This has been especially apparent with the number of hate crimes evolving from coronavirus, which people surprisingly refuse to call COVID. Maybe it's because some public officials don't know what it stands for. It stands for Coronavirus Disease 2019. Anywho, a lot of people are saying we need to stand up for the issues that our parents or grandparents have been silent against. Other people are saying we shouldn't be mad or complain because this is the same treatment other minority groups have been facing the entire time. And now it's our turn because we don't really face discrimination in the same way that our melanin brothers and sisters may. I've also heard the argument that Asians really don't get a say when it comes to racism for a number of reasons. One, that racism in it of itself is like an institutional thing and we're not persecuted in the same way, or that Asian culture is embedded with colorism and that Asians are very xenophobic and therefore Asian Americans are racist and we don't help fight for the other minorities here in the US that we're not minorities. I've heard or read it all. Yesterday, I've actually heard of this new term, boba liberals and boba conservatives. It was very confusing. I did not understand it. I had to Urban Dictionary it. I think I'm losing my touch with the young kids, but hey, life happens. So apparently, I don't think I have the full gist of what it means, to be honest, but something along the lines of they choose their politics to kind of align their goal sets with the European Americans. I'm still not sure. So as I was saying, what is the stake that Asian Americans have when it comes to racism and social justice movements like Black Lives Matter? A lot. But before we get into all that, I kind of want to touch on this podcast that I was listening to during quarantine. Honestly, for me, it's still quarantine. I don't like the outdoors. But it was I guess I have to come out of the nerd closet here. This podcast was a post-D&D session wrap-up podcast by Dimension 20. I don't know if you guys have watched College Humor and their new Dropout series where they do a bunch of new things. But one of the things that they do now, they play Dungeons and Dragons, which is very fun and entertaining for people like me who have overactive imaginations and honestly just like to see what the human brain thinks of on the spot, because all of it's improv. It's a whole imaginary game campaign where they stuck 6 comedians in a room together to see what they would do in a fantasy setting. Not important. So I was listening to the podcast, and one of the comedians, Siobhan, who I think also is a writer for Rick and Morty, she was kind of just explaining some plot points about her character. Don't worry, no spoilers here. Hey, listen, I hate spoilers as much as the next guy. And she made a very interesting point that I had never really thought about. So she was saying how in an abusive household where you have the dynamic of narcissistic parents, there is a favorite golden child and a scapegoat child. In this kind of dynamic, both children are victims of abuse. So that piqued my interest, so I decided to go digging on the interwebs, as I am very prone to do. Curiosity killed the cat, but the satisfaction of knowing brought it back to life. So I found this Medium article, and yes, I am very iffy when it comes to Medium articles, but they're good reads, honestly. And they kind of really summed up this dynamic between the golden child and the scapegoat child very well. Because in this kind of family dynamic, you have the scapegoat who the parents are always blaming. Why are you like this? Why can't you do better? You're the failure of the family. I don't know about you guys, but I think that's I've seen that a lot in Korean dramas, household dynamics. It's interesting. And then there's the golden child, the one who supposedly does better, the favorite child, the one who doesn't get in trouble, and the parents are always like, hey, yo, scapegoat kid, why can't you be more like golden child, your older brother, your sister? Why can't you be more like them? Why can't you be as smart as them? Now, while both face the intense psychological whiplash of being raised by a narcissist or two, the difference here is that the golden child ends up becoming a conformist because there's this extreme pressure to measure up to the parents' expectation, and when they don't, they receive maybe the silent treatment or cruel punishment, some kind of shame, and the golden child will end up giving up a part of their authentic self in order to serve the narcissistic parents' wants and whims. This also distances them from their siblings, who would probably be facing harsher punishments, treatment, a lot more apparent abuse. However, this is what spurs on the scapegoat child to become the quote-unquote rebel, who's more willing to leave the family because they know they shouldn't be treated like this. With the constant beratement and the mistreatment, of course, they should go and seek something better. But a lot of the times, in cases like these, people usually see that golden child sibling as another aggressor or another abuser. While that might be the case, you can't deny that they're also a victim. They're lashing out because of fear, honestly. They see the sibling who they know for a fact that their parents hate, and somewhere in the deep recesses of their unconscious mind, they know that they don't want to end up like that, and they'll do anything to not do that. Now, of course, this dynamic doesn't always exist. Sometimes siblings leave abusive households together. But the reason I brought all of this up when I promised to be talking about, racial tensions in America, everyone's favorite topic, the reason I bring this up is because I think that it is a great parallel to how America makes its minorities deal with each other. Especially if you compare the whole idea of a golden child with the idea and the myth known as the model minority. If you are unaware, it is a myth and not true. I'll say more on that after this quick music break. This is a new song that I found recently by Cosmic Boy, and it's called Nama. Enjoy! That was Minseo's No Good Girl and Haehyun-sang's Book of Love. So I think I just rambled on a lot about the whole golden child scapegoat dynamic, and now that I have that out of the way, I can try to take this chunk by chunk. So how does all of that rambling actually parallel to the whole Asian American and African American dynamic? Well, and just to preface, this is my opinion. I am not a sociologist to any degree, nor do I have the credentials to actually say that I know how the world works. But we all have our own version of the truth, and I thought I'd share mine with all of you. The way I see it, in the 1970s when Uncle Sam decided to say, look at these Asians that we selectively chose could come in as long as they had lots of money or lots of education. And then they put Asian people on a pedestal to look at black people and say, hey, why can't you be successful? Look at them. They just got here. And they're doing fine. Without actually explaining the whole process of who they let in. At the same time, while touting the Asian American success story, this obviously made a rift between the different minorities. Of course, these Asian people would love to think that, yeah, we are better because we're culturally more hardworking and smarter. Who wouldn't love to hear that? And anyone with eyes can see the way race plays out here in America. So, the question for a lot of Asian immigrants was, do I play by the rules and try not to also get persecuted? Or do I die trying to fight and get everyone rights? Now, a lot of people were divided on this. They still are today. And the model minority myth is still perpetuated even to this day, and it's not helping anyone. I still remember how in elementary school, if I did well on like an exam, especially if I did well in math, people in my class would be like, okay, but you only did well because you're Asian, which to then my small 9-year-old self would retort, no, you did bad because you're dumb. Yeah, no, I figured things out at an early age. But that was only because it was hurtful to have people try to diminish my accomplishments, to saying, oh, but that's your default. It's not like you earned it, which is also a harmful mentality. Because then you have Asian students who don't do well in school and teachers are like, oh, but they're Asian, they don't need my help, which is very wrong and very harmful. Now, the reason why the model minority stands side by side to the whole golden child idea is that it is a title and a position that can crumble at any moment. The way a golden child is taught that love is conditional and must be earned by doing whatever it is that the parents want, so doth lies the model minority. As soon as COVID-19 hit, I realized I was no longer the quiet Asian child who could probably make a good target for, I don't know, theft. I never was that kid, though. But I still remember in the early stages of the pandemic, I would get on a train because school was still a thing. And I realized very quickly I was the threat. People would see me, they would move to a different train car completely, if not just move their seat. And it was interesting to see how quickly people's mentality shifted from seeing me as this object that I don't really care about to imminent threat. Just goes to show you folks, if you do believe in the whole model minority nonsense, it's not real. It is something that, honestly, European America uses to keep us quiet because a meek, obedient culture doesn't pose a threat. Honestly, in my opinion, the reason that they see Asian people as quiet and small and diminutive is an insult, because they think we won't fight back and ask for what's ours. Although that hasn't been the case throughout history. There are a lot of pictures surfacing of how in the 60s, during the peak of the civil justice movement, there were a lot of Asians who stood by side, fighting, with signs that said, Yellow Peril stands for Black Power. And I think that that should stand true to this day. Because if you look at America as a whole and add all the minorities together, we are technically the majority. I mean, maybe technically not a majority because census data is so strange. Because I think America's technically 60% white, but also for some reason the census data also says this includes white Hispanics. And then I'm confused all over again. This is why we should just use European. It's so much easier. It's more logical. Anyways, before I go into a whole spiel and lose my train of thought, here is Warm by Chunggi-go. Welcome back. That was Uyo's Pizza and Nagepi by Dynamic Duo, or their English title, Hot Wings. So, as I was saying, I've been seeing a lot of things on, well, mostly Instagram, because who uses Facebook anymore? Basically about how there's a surprising number of Asian Americans who believe that since they didn't get anything from the black community that they shouldn't be helping, which I find very absurd. That's not why you help people. You help people because it's the right thing to do. But also, I would like to tell those people, if your family immigrated here after 1965, you owe everything to the Civil Rights Movement. Because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, which, although it technically ended, I think in the 40s or 50s, I think the quota was 100 people from Asia were allowed to come in. And that's all the Asian countries, all 49, which is an insane quota. And that didn't really stop until 1965 with the Immigration and Nationality Act, which stopped discrimination of people coming into America. Just a little tidbit for those of you naysayers out there. I know, a lot of people are sick of hearing about the Black Lives Matter movement, which honestly we shouldn't be, because it's not a political agenda, it's a human rights issue at the end of the day. And we need to get over the idea that we shouldn't be helping each other because what do I have to gain from it? That's not how helping works. If there is an injustice in society, we should work to undo it, not for any one self-benefit, but to progress society as a whole, because it feels like we're behind nowadays. Every time I turn on the news, I feel like the US is falling a little bit more behind than it already is. It's not fun to watch. Now, I'm sure you've been hearing a lot of hot buzzwords across the internet when it comes to our latest social justice movement here in the new age of Aquarius. I'll get into that in the Astrology Corner later. But I want to talk a little bit about incarceration in the United States. Just for a little bit. Bear with me. I'll turn on some music later. Yes, that is a bribe for you to keep listening. I hope it's working. Anyways, the amount of money that we spend on our prison system, insane. And for those of you who are wondering, well, gosh darn, Hannah, why are people attacking the justice system? We need our justice system so that we can lower crime, or whatever argument it is that you have. Yes, there needs to be a system of corrections, but right now, we don't have one. Another huge issue, the main issue to me with America's complex prison industry, while yes, private prisons that run for profit are a huge issue, I'd have to say that it's the one loophole in the 13th Amendment. You know, the one that banned slavery in America? Yeah, there's a loophole in that for those of you who didn't know. In case you haven't read the Constitution in its entirety, as I believe most Americans don't, to directly quote the 13th Amendment that passed with, famous 16th U.S. President Lincoln, it states that, and I quote, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States, or any place subject to their jurisdiction." Now, that is a lot of legal lingo. What does it mean? It means slavery is outlawed except if you're a criminal. If you are convicted of a crime, you are, by definition of the Constitution, technically allowed to be a slave. Now, was that loophole intentional? Who knows? Have people been abusing this loophole to its fullest extent? Absolutely. If you look at the demographics for a bit, and bear with me, according to the U.S. Census data, about 12.7% of the entire population identifies as black. Now, compared to that, 40% of the prison population is black. Now, some people like to bring up pseudoscience and all of that. I'm just going to strictly state this as a statistical anomaly, because statistically, it's very strange to have over triple the percentage of the population in prison. And if we're sticking with statistics, guess what? 25% of the entire world's prison population, that means every single criminal in the world, 25% of them are in the US. I don't know about you, but out of 7 trillion human beings on this planet, the idea that this country of 300 million, having a quarter of the world's criminals, strikes me as extremely odd. Does not make sense in any shape or form. We also, as a country, spend $75 billion of taxpayer money on incarceration, compared to $65 billion spent on education. Now, some of you may say that's only a $10 billion difference, but if Baruch has taught me anything, it's that you want to look at things per capita. That is $100,000 of your taxpayer money going towards one prisoner, as opposed to $10,000 going to one student. That's where the big difference lies. So, in a society that spends more money on incarceration than education, is it such a shock at how crime is such a huge problem in America and somehow education is so out of reach for most of the population? No, because that's how we're spending our money. Now, before I go into a bunch of facts and figures and bore you all to death, here is an oldie but a goodie, a song that I've been re-listening to recently. That's from 1997, 이현우's 헤어진 다음 날, or The Day After the Breakup. There is a rumor going around my family that I think a second cousin once removed or something helped compose this. I have no idea, but I like the idea. So, here's 헤어진 다음 날. Enjoy! Welcome back. That was How's Your Night by Just, or 너의 밤은 어때 by 그냥. Now, I'd like to welcome you all to this week's Astrology Corner. Today I'm going to be talking about something a little broader, and a term some of you might have heard because, honestly, New Age terminology is everywhere, and I can't seem to avoid it. The Age of Aquarius. Now, that's been the title of a song and many other things. I won't go into too much detail because that would get long. But basically, it's like, you know how there are 12 zodiac signs, and each one has like a month? You can kind of just like expand that, and then each one has like an age. So you could have like an age of Gemini or like an age of Pisces. Right now we're in the age of Aquarius. Each one has like, I think about 2,000 years. I know, so long. So what does that mean that we're in the Aquarian age for like the next 2,000 years? I think it started like what, 2011, 12? Remember how we thought the world was going to end in 2012? So basically the entire idea of this superstitious belief is that during this Aquarian age, everything will be about information and knowledge, and the focus shifts from a singular individuality mentality and a focus on your identity and your own individual existence, you know, like the whole to be or not to be concept, instead shifting on accepting yourself as a whole person, kind of like being to simply be. Along with this kind of shift, it's said to elevate the global consciousness in a sort of sense. That's why we've been seeing what a lot of people would like to call radical change. Now, I don't see a lot of these issues as radical. I feel like they're just issues that people haven't been dealing with, and now we're at a tipping point for all of them, and the dominoes have fallen. People who haven't been able to see and learn from history think this just happened recently, and there must be something wrong with the current generation, but no, these are issues that have been around and society's been ignoring on a whole, whether it's civil rights, environmental consciousness, women's rights, gay rights. All of these things have come to the forefront of society's attention, and we see it blasted everywhere because nothing's really being fixed. This shift into the Aquarian age will bring out eventually the best of mankind, but in the process will also bring out the worst. Because in order to properly heal, there will be some pain associated with it. And in the same way, in order for society to become better, we need to out people like Jeffrey Epstein and allegedly Ghislaine Maxwell. I just learned how to pronounce her name and I'm very proud of myself. People like Epstein, who caused suffering for so many young children, have to be outed. And that'll bring a lot of rage and fear into society, but it is a necessary step to realize that there is a problem and that it needs to be remedied. The whole point of this is, don't give in to the fear or the despair or the rage that comes with all of these happenings around us. Yes, you can be enraged and you are totally valid to be sad for these issues, but don't let that get you down, because it's a time for change, and in order to bring about change, we have to find out what we need to change. This is going to be a very interesting Age of Aquarius, in my opinion. And with that, I will wrap up this week's Astrology Corner, which has been a little longer than usual. This is 홍우정아's 생애, or life. Enjoy. Welcome back. Now I wanted to talk a little bit about something called qualified immunity. What does that mean? You've been hearing a lot of buzzwords around, and quite frankly, you're sick and tired of having to figure out and Google what everything means. So that's why I'm here tonight, to try to explain things in an easy-to-digest way. So, I'm sure you all know, America loves suing people. We all know the jingles on TV for the countless law firms in America. Now, sometimes public officials do bad things. It could be excessive force or, I don't know, something else that they shouldn't be doing. Abuse of power, all that good stuff. Now, technically, under Section 1983, you can sue officials for violating your constitutional rights and for any damages that might have occurred because of them. However, back way when in 1967, we got qualified immunity, which basically means that unless their actions violated a clearly established law, you can't sue them. So what does that mean? Because that's also a lot of legalese. Basically, has something like this already happened, and if so, did someone else get arrested for it? For example, an officer using excessive force where, in this past case, they got convicted for this and lost a case. If that exists, then yes, you can sue them and win. However, for those of you who are trying to find entry-level jobs, may be familiar with this cycle. It's that whole idea of, I'm applying for a job, but this job is an entry-level job and still requires previous work experience. But in order to get that previous work experience, I need to get a job. But oh no, this job wants previous work experience. And so the cycle continues. It's basically that, but with, I want to sue this official for having used excessive force. But oh no, I need a previous case where someone won while suing an official for excessive force. But oh no, that case doesn't exist yet. And because it doesn't, it never will. What a paradox. Also, a lot of the time, it has to be exactly the same. So let's say there was a case where an officer unleashed a police dog on a motionless suspect in a ravine. Does anyone even go to ravines anymore? Let's say this happened. However, let's say this new case which someone is trying for is they unleashed a police dog on a compliant suspect in a canal. Motionless and compliant aren't exactly the same word. Neither is ravine and canal, even though they're synonyms. It won't help this new case. They will just, throw it out and say, oh, but this isn't a clearly established law, because the words are slightly different, even though they kind of mean the same thing. That means no one gets in trouble for doing whatever the hell they want, as long as they're creative. It's basically getting bonus points for creativity while doing bad things. That's a very, very bad system, because guess what? It'll just lead to a new and more vicious way to commit atrocities. So, along with qualified immunity, another hot off-the-press topic that you've probably been hearing left and right, defund the police. Now, what does that mean? Why do people hate police officers? Why don't they want them to have money? That's not what this is. It's basically the idea that police reform hasn't really been working because it's costing us money, but the numbers of cases of things like police brutality or excessive force aren't going down, or, the number of straight up deaths. There's also the issue where a lot or most public institutions like parks, schools are all being defunded, but police budgets keep increasing despite there being no direct visible benefit to my eyes. Now, a lot of people get very scared by the word defund, but that doesn't mean just stop the flow of money 100% completely. Obviously, that's not what this means. No one wants that. We all like having a nice, peaceful civil society. Human beings as a whole tend to like security and safety. Who was it? Maslow's hierarchy of needs? We love that. What people want instead, when they're actually saying defund the police, is saying, how about we take some of that money and invest it in something like schools so kids can learn how to apply themselves to society, or invest it into things like mental health institutions, public mental health institutions, so that people can get the help they need instead of turning to a life of crime, or combat homelessness so that there's less cases of people just calling the cops. Redirecting resources into community initiatives, things to help the community. Because let's be real, prevention is always better than damage control. So if we can prevent the crimes from happening, why wouldn't we take that instead of beefing up our cops and basically planning for societal failure? Planning for failure, not a smart move. We should be trying to prevent problems from arising, not trying to figure out how to fix them when they crop up. Because imagine if there's someone who's super drunk on the street and they're kind of belligerent. Instead of calling an armed police officer, imagine calling 311 and getting someone to come that's especially trained for people who are under the influence of various substances. Then these people can get help or sober up and not potentially face the imminent threat of death. Because, to be quite honest, no one deserves to die for committing a crime, especially when we all have the right to our day in court amongst a panel of our peers. To have someone die in the process of being arrested or whatever it is strips them of this right and basically has police officers being judge, jury, and executioner all in one, which is not the job that they're supposed to have. Police officers are law enforcement, not law executioner. That got real heavy real fast. So, up next is going to be 누구나 비밀은 있다. Everyone Has Secrets by IU. Now that we're back, I just kind of want to talk about equality versus equity. Now, this was a term that I tried to figure out, I think, in my early years of school, because equity comes up a lot when you're in business school. And a lot of the times, I think people get confused as to what it is that they actually want because, well, English has so many terms that are so similar to each other, but then when you actually try to apply them, they're completely different. So, I'll give y'all a very simple example to illustrate the differences. Let's say there is, I don't know, a 12-foot tall wall, and on the other side of this wall, there is a baseball game, and for some reason, you and your friends want to watch it over the fence or wall because, I don't know, you're all children and you can't buy tickets by yourselves. So let's say there are two of you. One of you's 4 feet tall and the other one is 5 feet tall. And there are 2 7-foot tall ladders. There's a lot of math. I'm so sorry. But basically, you who are 4 feet tall are on this 7-foot tall ladder. You can't see past the wall because you're still missing a foot. But your friend who's 5 feet tall can see because, well, 5 plus 7 is 12, and now they can see over the wall and watch the baseball game, and you can't. A lot of people would call that equality. You both have the same sized ladders, so you should both technically be able to do the same things with these same ladders. But the fact of the matter is that you can't because someone has the advantage of height and you don't. A lot of people use this as a way to brush issues under the rug and say, oh, well, minorities have access to all of the same institutions and education systems that we do, so why can't they do as well as their European American counterparts? Because we didn't start off the race equally. Now, equity would be giving each person a ladder in account to their height so that they could both see over the wall. That means the shorter person would have a taller ladder so that they can actually see over this wall and watch the baseball game. That would be equity. However, a new thing that's cropped up on my radar, a third option. I always love a good third option because everyone loves to think in this binary mentality, this or that, left or right. There's always another option. So, this third term that has come into the fray, justice, that's right, which is fixing the system and offering equal access to both tools and opportunities. So basically, it's replacing that damn wall with a fence so that you could see through, and then suddenly no one needs any ladders. Again, very strange example, but yeah, that's how it will work. Just another abstract concept that I think could be very useful in helping our society today. Because let's be real, there's not a whole lot of justice going around right now. I'm not going to name names, but we all know it. I mean, sure, in New York City, they decide to cut the police budget from $6 billion to $5 billion. But it appears like most people think that's not enough. Might be because that's not what we asked for. Because when you look at where the money in the budget is going side by side, it's pretty insane. Because let's see here. You have about $1 billion going into all the health and hospital sectors. And you have about $780 million going towards youth and community development, because for some reason those two are together. Homeless services does get about $2 billion. Housing gets a little under $1 billion. Small businesses gets under $200 million. But for some reason, the police get such a huge chunk of the budget. Despite being in the middle of a pandemic, they get 5 times more money than the Department of Health and hospitals. It's a lot to take in. Again, people, when they say defund, they want divest and invest in communities. But let's be real, it's a lot easier to just chant defund the police. I don't know how you would chant an entire sentence. I know for sure I probably wouldn't be able to. Well, it looks like our segment is coming to a close. As always, I will give you guys a few suggestions on things to watch. Recently, I've been watching the Netflix docuseries Jeffrey Epstein Filthy Rich. Very eye-opening, especially with all the allegations of the whole Pizzagate thing. I am not going to go into that because it kind of plays out like a conspiracy theory and it's a bit strange, but definitely interesting enough to go through if you have spare time during this pandemic. Another thing that I'd really like to recommend, a K-drama, Reply 1988. It has all of my favorite Korean songs from the 80s. The cast is so lovable and you have so much character development. And honestly, it's just like nostalgic. I didn't live in Korea through the 80s, but it feels nostalgic. You have the old cord phones and the small analog television sets. Plus, it's a great way to start a conversation with your parents about their life in Korea. I had so many conversations with my own mother, which mostly entailed of questions like, did this really happen? Or did you have houses like that? Why are there glass bottles on top of that wall? Answer: it was a home defense mechanism so that people couldn't just, jump over the wall and break in. Very interesting stuff. So definitely do go check those out. And I'll see you all next week here at 10 p.m. This has been wonderful tonight. And before I let y'all go, I think I'll play you a song that's actually from 1988. 최여섭's 세월이 가면. Have a good night, y'all. I'll see you next week.